Privacy as we know it is dead. Over the last several years, countless leaks, whistleblowers, news stories, and so on have revealed a massive infrastructure that Orwell couldn't have even imagined, just built to collect your data. And surprisingly, I'm not actually talking about government. Certainly that's there, but that's not what really scares me. I'll admit I've worked for governments in the past, the US government specifically. And what I saw there was a large infrastructure in place to look for, catch, and punish any abuse of the system. What concerns me is less that, because that actually worked very well in my experience. But what we're starting to see is private companies having similar capabilities without that oversight, and potentially without the ability to have that oversight. So, big data, the Wikipedia definition here, data sets that are so large or complex that traditional data processing applications are inadequate to deal with them. So, we're talking so much data we don't know what to do with it, or what we even can do with it. The question is often what's being collected, and that's a really tough question to answer because it's what's not being collected is probably a better question, right? This seems to be the approach. Collect everything you possibly can and figure out what to do with it later. We've got tons of storage capacity, right? And the algorithms typically have not been in place to actually process much of the data. Now we're starting to see that change. So the promise of big data is huge, right? We're starting to see some of the applications of it. These are actual headlines. So big data technologies will play a key role in diversifying Saudi Arabia's economy away from a huge dependence on oil revenue. And even the impossible, right? Or at least what was thought to be impossible is being attributed to big data. And of course, I'm sure everyone knows the adage, if a headline ends in a question mark, the answer is no. Within the first paragraph, the answer was in fact no. But this is the type of thing that we're talking about big data resulting in. And it's really world-changing. A lot of potential. So the title of the talk is Breaking Big Data, Evading. I really wanted it to be evading meaningful analysis of the metadata of your life, but that was too long. So just evading analysis of the metadata of your life. So why would we want to avoid this if we're talking about the Cubs winning the World Series and reducing oil dependency and curing cancer? So I'm going to propose a slightly more simplified version of the definition here. So data plus algorithms equals big data. IBM did a recent study that showed 3.1 trillion US dollars, trillion with a T, that's 1,000 billion, US dollars lost per year from the US GDP based on bad data. So we're taking in all this data, we're doing a ton of analysis on it, and then we're making decisions based on that information, but based on the conclusions from the data plus the algorithms. So this is 4.5 times the value of Apple that we're losing every year based on bad data. So why is the data bad? As you can imagine, tons of potential reasons. One, figuring out how to parse a bunch of data is not necessarily the sexiest job. A lot of focus is placed on other aspects of this. Bad data sources. There are every reason you can imagine for any data point to be slightly incorrect. Corruption of data, certainly. So we have to factor this into the definition here. So let's say bad data plus algorithms equals big data. The algorithms are good though, right? Maybe not. So Kathy O'Neill released this book a little over a month ago, Weapons of Math Destruction, and it's fantastic. As it turns out, these algorithms reflect the biases of their creators. So we're really looking at algorithmic confirmation bias here. So, and this is not in a really overt or measurable way. So we're seeing that some of the conclusions down the road may be different than we expect. And there's a tendency in Western culture that the facts are the facts, right? And we perceive these as facts. Unfortunately, the algorithms may not be as accurate as we presume them to be. So now we're looking at bad data plus biased algorithms equals big data. And I would argue that you could almost change this to say big delusions. And this is what we're hoping to cure cancer, right? I don't know if anyone has seen North by Northwest, the Hitchcock classic. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. It's a fantastic movie. In the movie, Cary Grant's character is out to lunch with some customers or colleagues, and over the intercom in the background, someone pages George Kaplan. And to please get the waiter's attention, there's a phone call or a message for him. At about the same time, Cary Grant's character waves to a waiter to call him over to order something. And the people watching for who George Kaplan is, which it turns out to be some spies, see Cary Grant do this. And so it's the classic case of mistaken identity. The next hour and a half as it plays out in quite fantastical ways, but great movie. This is very much what we're potentially looking at when it comes to this bad data plus biased algorithms. And it doesn't even have to be bad data. Imagine if your cell phone is connecting to a cell tower in one particular place that happens to also have some terrorists connecting to it. And then the next day, you're texting your friend who the day before was texting someone else who was texting someone in that same terrorist group, and so on. And you play this out, and very quickly, you can potentially algorithmically be linked with some bad guys with nothing to do with it. Or any other number of ways you can imagine this going, right? You don't even have to be in the same hotel and raising your hand to get the waiter's attention to be thrust into this world that you may have nothing to do with. Unfortunately, our normal techniques here don't really work against big data. There's been a lot of OPSEC information out there. The Grugs OPSEC briefing is fantastic. OPSEC has traditionally been geared towards hiding from police or intelligence or things like that. And I'm not going to talk about that at all. But so we're going to talk about controlling what metadata you're putting out there into this big data machine and limiting information you might not want associated with you personally. So, along with all these leaks revealing some of this infrastructure, we've also found out some things that actually really work. And one of them is encryption. So to quote Edward Snowden, properly implemented crypto systems are one of the few things you can rely on. Now, properly implemented, I'm sure everyone here knows just how difficult this can be. But good algorithms and a good implementation, and you're probably pretty good, right? But so what? Let's assume that all of this content is encrypted. Email content, messaging, phone calls, packet payloads, etc. This is all things that are fairly easy to encrypt. Maybe not for your mom or your grandma, but I think everyone here is probably really well versed at this. So let's assume that's encrypted. Along with that, there are a lot of things that aren't encrypted. So this is the classic metadata, right? Sender, recipient, participants, link, source, destination. So let's look at a quick case study. We've got Alice and Bob. Alice gets an email from British Airways. And then Alice's phone is in Seoul. And a public post to Facebook. Seoul is so fun. Meanwhile, Bob texts Cindy. And I forgot to add, Alice and Bob are presumably happily married. So Bob texts Cindy. Cindy texts Bob. Bob Ubers to a hotel. Cindy Ubers to a hotel. Bob has a charge, fairly large one, on his credit card at the hotel. Then there's an Uber from the hotel to the restaurant. Another very large charge at the restaurant. Uber back to the hotel. Then maybe the next day, an Uber from the hotel to Bob's. Another one from the hotel to Cindy's. We got the obligatory text. And Alice is back in London. Is anyone confused about what just happened there? There's not a shred of actual content in this, right? This is all just metadata. So these are the things you can't encrypt, or at least maybe you can, but they're much more difficult to encrypt than the actual content. And this can reveal so much. So Uber did this. I don't know if anyone is familiar with this, but Uber put out a blog post called Rides of Glory. And you can imagine what this might be. They started tracking rides from like a bar to a house at, say, 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. And then another ride from that house to another house in the morning. And then they tracked this across massive amounts of data over a year. And it was all presumably sanitized, not tied to any individuals, but they were able to determine what neighborhoods, what days, etc., were optimal for one-night stands. And this is your privacy, right? So it was funny. It was really interesting, actually. I'm sure a lot of people were marking days on calendars, like, oh, I'm going to go out this day. But ultimately, this could easily be tied to you as an individual by anyone with access to this data. So, but we all probably know metadata is really, really dangerous. Let me caveat this. I kind of lied to you before. There's more to this quote than just this. Unfortunately, endpoint security is so terrifically weak that NSA can frequently find ways around it and replace NSA with everyone. The talk yesterday about flipping bits was just fantastic. If you missed it, be sure to catch the video because it was completely amazing what they were able to do. Endpoint security is terrible, and it just seems to be getting worse. That talk really illustrated, to me at least, how bad things are. So endpoints suck. There's an ancient adage in the security world, right? 2 types of endpoints: those who have been compromised and those who will be. Now, around the 90s, that started to change, and people said, well, there are two types of endpoints: those who have been compromised and those who don't know it yet. I'd just say there's a new adage: everything's compromised. And this isn't FUD, right? Fear, uncertainty, doubt. Because what isn't compromised has permission from you. So, another case study. Here's Bob. 9 p.m. And he pulls out Google Maps, drives to the pub. His phone GPS also shows Bob's driving to the pub. Then Bob checks in at the pub. At 2 a.m., there's a much more reasonable charge for Bob at the pub. And then he drives home. And then at 6:30 a.m., Bob's driving to work. So his insurance app on his phone has permission to location data, has GPS, all of this sort of stuff. And even more frightening, what if his insurance company and his credit card provider are the same company? So now, do you think we can expect a spike in Bob's insurance rate after seeing, well, okay, he was driving really fast to the pub, maybe a little too slow and weaving on the way home, and then only 4.5 hours later, probably not enough time to metabolize, 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. worth of beer, driving to work. So this is an example of the way that we're going to very soon start seeing this data being used against us. So, I'm sorry? Yeah. Well, so the gentleman just said very soon or right now. It's a very good point. I haven't seen any spikes in my insurance, although I don't exhibit those same behaviors, so I don't know. It's certainly in the works. I don't know that it's actually being put into practice yet. So, your life has patterns. Your habits, what sites you're on, what you like, where you get your news, what channels you're hanging out in IRC, all this sort of thing. It's fairly trivial, and let me also include in that accounts, certainly things like this, but anything that is unique to you, and surprisingly, a lot is. There was a long time when it was easy to blend into with the masses, but you got to consider that when everything's a data point, it becomes much more difficult to blend in. So, your locations. Even if you have your GPS turned off, which cell tower is your phone connecting to? The routes you're driving. Your favorite locations that you go, your home. And something else. Let's say that your car doesn't have like a low jack or a GPS built into it. You leave your phone at home and you go for a drive. Presumably no one would be able to track you, right? So in the US, we've started to see some private companies donating cameras to police departments. And they'll put them in their cars and drive around. And this camera is constantly looking at license plates. They'll grab it, parse it, send it off to the cloud where the company who provided the license plate then reads this. It says, hey, is there a warrant out for this? Is this person, is the car stolen? Things like this. Good things, right? If your car gets stolen and you report it and a police officer drives by it, it'll catch it. What we're starting to see also, though, is that this might be used in ways that, so the old adage, if you're not the customer, you're the product? This is a great example of that. So these companies are starting to sell this to like collection agencies, things like that. So now, your location is a data point, even without you doing anything to cause it to be. And it's certainly with red light cameras and things of this nature. We're seeing a lot of that as well. So your interests, the things you're searching for, things you're posting about, even teams that you like, or whatever your interests are. I'm from Arkansas originally, so I got to put the Razorbacks up there if anyone's familiar. But all of these things come together to form a fingerprint of you, right? Your friends, so who you're in touch with, all of your social media. And as I mentioned before, who you're in the same place at the same time with. So this becomes more of a data point, right? And you see a lot of this in, certainly on the government side, there have been a number of movies demonstrating this type of thing. But even what aisles you're walking down in the store, what causes you to stop and linger for a second, this is being tracked too. And even your feelings. So, something called sentiment analysis, where things you write reflect an emotional state or an interest or something you like, something you don't like. And anything you write publicly is being sucked into this. And as they do this sentiment analysis, they can actually, and it can be language agnostic too. So it's pretty fascinating technology, but it can pretty quickly result in determining your interest, how you feel about things. This is being used to predict elections, and quite effectively, which is also kind of scary, but it's, well, and then of course your parents. So this is good stuff here. The FBI operates the next generation identification interstate photo system, face recognition service that allows law enforcement agencies to search a database of over 30 million photos to support criminal investigations. The problem is, what do FBI photos look like? It's straight on and then to the side, right? Conveniently, Facebook has millions more photos from every angle with millions and millions of people going in and making sure all the data is correct. So their database is much better than even the FBI's. And again, and I'm not picking on Facebook or any particular company, but the amount of oversight over private companies versus governments is dramatically less. So, in a very, every day I feel more and more like I'm in a William Gibson novel. So we're starting to see makeup and hairstyles designed to evade facial recognition. It looks fairly bizarre, but and there's also a anti-paparazzi scarf that's come out. I don't know if anyone's seen it, but it's a scarf that's highly reflective. So if you put it on and someone takes a flash photograph, it reflects so much light that everything other than the scarf is black in the photo, which would potentially work with IR as well, right? So surveillance cameras tend to put out a bunch of IR light. And this week, this is really cool. Now we are seeing some glasses designed to not just mask who you are from facial recognition, but to potentially make you appear to be someone else. So you could actually frame someone with frames. So, and then your writing. So stylometrics. This is also called authorship attribution. There's a ton of stuff out there, and you can algorithmically look through large bodies of text, build an author profile, and then compare that to text by an unknown author, and with a great deal of certainty determine that it really was that author. So I included this paper. I actually implemented this in Perl this year, just kind of messing around and testing it out, and it actually works fantastically. And there are a lot more people out there doing this with a lot more seriousness than me. And so Dartmouth has put out a tool called Anonymouth, which takes in, you can create an author profile of yourself, and then put some text you've written in there, which will then try to make it not match your profile, right? So there are tools you can use to avoid this, but this becomes kind of a pain, right? Another technique I've seen is putting a body of text into Google Translate, translating it from language A to language B to language C, and language C back to language A. By that point, you have almost complete gibberish, but you have to then come in and make it make sense again. But then it's very unlikely to be tied back to you, except you sound like an idiot, right? Your timing. So what times of day you're active? When you're posting on what forums? When you're traveling somewhere? This right here, it actually looks like snacks. So, people are sleeping, eating, and then get a midnight snack. It's actually a time analysis of shark attacks. So it is snacks, but that's harder to track than you are. So when you tweet, when you post on Facebook, when you do anything, really becomes significant in identifying you. There was a fantastic talk on pattern analysis yesterday, which I attended, and it was really top notch. I'd encourage you to check out the video of that as well if you missed it. All of this comes together to form what in the government world is called pattern of life analysis. It's a fingerprint of you based on all of these things and much more. And the way we have to think about this now, so 5-10 years ago, you could envision it as, well, as long as the people watching me don't detect when or what I'm doing, then it's hard to do this, right? Except now we have to consider that everything, just everything's a data point. So anyone with access to the data, just like Uber with the rides of glory, anyone with that access can do this analysis almost trivially. And then combine that with the potential for bad data or biased algorithms, and it's really easy to see how things that we do can impact us in unexpected ways. A really good example of this is take a home loan. Typically we think of, okay, they do a credit check and they're not basing things on, let's say, our race, right? In fact, in a lot of the West, certainly in the US, that's illegal. Unfortunately, the algorithms are basing things on that. So if you Google racist algorithms, there's been a lot that's come out recently about this, where people are being denied home loans based on things that frankly are appalling. So a quick look at pattern of life analysis. So again, we're not looking at individuals or analysts doing this. Hal was an easy choice here, but so your habits, your locations, your interests, your friends, your feelings, your metadata are all being pumped into this machine that's then trying to make sense of it. And so out comes you. Except it's not you. It's what we'll call a persona. So everything you do, everything you use, everything you say is linked to a persona. And if you're not intentionally doing something, and very intentionally and very technically active, doing something in a way that won't have that link to your persona, then it's linked to your true persona. Even the things that you really don't want linked to you, right? So it's all in there. And anything, absolutely anything, can link to personas. And if we're trying to evade having activities associated with us, then links are bad. So I mentioned this before. The Grugs OPSEC briefing is absolutely fantastic. A ton of videos, slides are out there. If you haven't watched it, please do. It's really good. It's probably one of the best OPSEC resources I've seen. So just a quick one-slide refresher for anyone who's missed it, and this is real fast. Here's one of the fundamental premises. Paranoia does not work retroactively. So we have to be mindful of this going forward, not go back and fix things. So for any persona, one account, one persona, one activity. One phone number, one persona, one activity. One connection, one home, one device, one location. In short, one anything, one use. And I'm sure that some people are saying, but Dave, what about this? One use. Seriously. So other options. I'll tell you a quick story about my best friend since the time I was 5. Like I mentioned, I grew up in Arkansas, which, for those not familiar, it's right in the center of the U.S. and very woods and mountains, that type of thing. So my best friend is kind of the proverbial mountain man. No Facebook, no, he has a phone, but he barely uses it. He 10 years ago, he was like, I'm not getting in on any of this stuff. All my information out there. I don't want people seeing what I'm doing, all this. And so I call it the mountain man approach, right? Largely after him. So unfortunately, and that worked for a long time. Today, though, let's say you meet someone and they don't have a Facebook and they don't have any information. You Google them and there's nothing out there. They have no profiles on anything. How likely are you to believe that? It starts becoming more of a data point to not have millions of data points than the reverse, right? It's easier to hide in the middle of a haystack than it is, off here by yourself. In fact, this was fantastic. This came out, I believe, today or yesterday. This is from Reuters. When a new American diplomat arrives for duty at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow or Beijing, CIA officials say Russian and Chinese intelligence operatives run data analytics programs that check the digital dust associated with his or her name. If the newcomer's footprint in that dust, social media posts, cell phone calls, debit card payments, is too small, the diplomat is flagged as an undercover CIA officer. So the one sure approach of not having your information out there results in you being more of a target than in putting out the right amount of data, right? So this is the essence of this talk, is designing what data you put out there to represent the persona you've chosen to be available. One of the best ways I've found to do this is to actually kind of go through and look at points of failure, right? So it's sort of harder to teach really good practices because, unfortunately, there's no one-size-fits-all in OPSEC. So this is a true story. Step 1, go to Harvard. Step 2, take a really tough class. Don't study at all for the final exam. And then the day of the final, wake up and realize, oh crap. So what do you do to get out of it? Email a bomb threat, apparently. Don't do this, obviously. So this gentleman woke up at about 8 a.m. His test was at 9. At 8:30, he pulled up his laptop, opened it up, logged into Tor, went via Tor to Gorilla Mail, emailed a bomb threat to Harvard officials, the Harvard PD, the Crimson, which is Harvard's newspaper, turned off his laptop, and then he went to take the test. As expected, right at 9 o'clock, when he's sitting down with everyone, everyone comes in and he gets evacuated with all the other students. too easy, right? I mean, now he's got at least a day, maybe a few days to get really prepared for the test. Except that the police went and talked to Gorilla Mail, and Gorilla Mail said, this connection came in via Tor. So, dead end, right? I mean, conventional wisdom goes, well, we're not going to catch it if it came in via Tor. Except then they looked at Harvard's network logs at 8:30 a.m. on that day, and guess how many people were using Tor on the Harvard network? 4. So they went and knocked on 4 doors, and one guy freaked out. So this is a really good illustration of sometimes OPSEC doesn't work the way we hope it does. I stole a slide from the Grug's OPSEC presentation. And again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the information he presents. I completely agree with it. What he says is VPN equals privacy, Tor equals anonymity. So when you connect to Tor, you're routed through several servers around the world, none knowing where they are in that chain, and you end up coming out on the internet with no real way to trace that back to you. Fantastic technology. The exit node, as it's known, is controlled by whoever has the willingness to operate a Tor exit node, right? Giving everyone in the world anonymous access to their connection. So who might do this? Well, a lot of people who might want to see what's happening. There have been a number of Tor exit nodes controlled by nefarious characters and organizations. So conventional wisdom goes, connect to Tor, then connect to a VPN over Tor, so that even the exit node isn't being monitored, and you have both anonymity and privacy. So the way the Grug says this, Tor connection to a VPN, okay, VPN connection to Tor, go to jail. Except in this one case, where the significant data point, and I'll remind you, everything's a data point, and we never know which ones will be significant. In this case, the significant data point was that there were only 4 people using Tor. So had he reversed this and done the go to jail line and done VPN then Tor, he wouldn't be in jail. So the moral of the story is you really have to be mindful of your particular situation and what data you're creating and how that can be used against you. So that's really the moral of the story. So what about Bob? We've done a few case studies with Bob, so we'll do some more. Now Bob, he's single now, and he's got nothing to do, so he decides to take up whatever activity is what we'll call it. So he takes up activity, and Bob lives upstairs from a cafe. He goes downstairs. He uses their Wi-Fi. Pulls out his laptop, opens up a VM, and does that activity. So how many points here are connectable to Bob? And feel free to be actively engaged here. You holler out a number or anything. I'll start. So 1, he lives upstairs from the cafe, so there's location. So it's the same location. This Wi-Fi, so it's a connection, right? But it's conveniently a connection that's very closely tied to his location. And then VM on his personal laptop, so you got the same hardware. So we've got at least 3 points that link Bob to this activity in this case. So very easy for someone, and especially for an all-knowing machine learning, big data algorithm to start tying this activity to Bob. There's also time, right? So time of day. Bob works from 8 to 5. He goes to the pub from 9 to 2. And so we've got from 5 to 9 where Bob does this activity, right? So there's timing as well. Over time, this becomes easily linkable to Bob. So let's try something else. Bob now drives across town to a different cafe. He brings his phone, but turns it off. Or alternately, he has one of those little Faraday bags that he puts his phone in that blocks all the signals, right? He uses their Wi-Fi, and he uses a proxy. Or he uses 7 proxies. And again, VM on personal laptop. So, anyone want to toss out any potential issues? No? Okay. So, we've got the drive. So, at least the location is potentially not tieable down. Unless he took his car, or unless he took an Uber, or unless he took a cab, or anything else that would potentially have a data point linking him to that ride, to that location. I would argue that you probably can't have that at least something is going to tie into it, whether it's the police car driving by the vehicle, or a GPS tracker, or an Uber ride, or whatever else, right? So he brings his phone but turns it off. This goes back to the mountain man situation. So now all of a sudden, Bob's always active. He's always texting Cindy or whoever else. And now for 4 hours, not only is Bob's phone turned off, but it's just nowhere to be found. And then when it comes on, it's across town. So again, sometimes it's more noticeable when there's a lack of data. So then you got their Wi-Fi with a proxy and the personal laptop, right? Again, same hardware. So we've got a lot of these same potential issues. This is a much tougher one to track, right? Public transport to a park with Wi-Fi. His phone is on, but it's at home. He uses Tor and completely separate hardware. So, anyone seeing any potential problems? I see several. They're just probably a little harder to find. So one, public transport has a ton of surveillance cameras and things like this, right? So with all the facial recognition, unless you're doing something to try to mask that, it makes it tough. The phone is on at home. This is a great alternative to the black hole of turning it off or the Faraday bag, right? Except for one potential thing. We're still back to the mountain man scenario because now he's not using his phone. So where you'd normally see 50 outbound text messages and a few emails and some Facebook activity or Twitter or whatever, now you're seeing nothing. So again, this is better than every other option we've seen so far, but it's still not great. Then separate hardware, that's fantastic. So what's the problem with using a VM on your normal machine to then do activity? Yeah. So what if you alter your MAC address in software? Yeah, right. So one, there's probably a few seconds where that doesn't take place. I'll tell a quick personal story. I was doing some research at my office on Tor over our network. And I always, at my office, I'll do a VPN to Tor so that I don't set off a bunch of flags that someone's using Tor at the office. I had Tor, my Tor browser open. I popped up my laptop, typed in my password, and did the VPN connection. Within seconds, our IT guy popped his head in. He's like, "Are you on tour?" and it was fantastic. It was a great sign that it was working. But even in that split second, you can set out that data point, right? Which really brings us to information tends to leak in ways that we least expect it. Good example of this is pizza. Sounds kind of funny, but consider this. Let's say you're at your office and you have a really big something happening. Acquisition, big project with a customer or something like that. If I'm outside your office every day counting food deliveries to your office, on an average day we'll expect to see, some normal number. But when something really big's happening, no one's leaving the office, so they're ordering more food. So I can actually tell that something's happening based on the amount of food delivery. And parking lots, right? So this is called pizza int and parking lot int. Int being intelligence. So when you walk out of your office and all of your executives' cars are in the parking lot at 7 p.m., what would you immediately think? Something's up, right? If they normally leave by 5, right? Let's say they do. So you're walking out of the office and the CEO's car's in the parking lot 2 hours later than normal. If you track this type of thing daily, then all of these little data points really come together and really start to show things. So, in summary, assume everything's compromised. Be aware of links between any activity and yourself. Look at your own pattern of life and understand it. A really good way to avoid doing something that would tie that to you would be to understand what you're normally doing and then operate outside of that in ways that would be unconnectable to you. And then watch out for leaks where you least expect them. And I'll actually put out a request to this audience. So this is Black Hat. We've got some of the most technically talented people in the world right here. So I've been working on this research for quite some time now, and it's really, really difficult to evade some kind of link between any arbitrary activity in yourself, at least technologically. So I mean, as we talked about, there are ways to do it, but it's really kind of reverting to old techniques. So I'd ask you to look into this. Start looking at ways that we can actually increase our privacy, which is a direction no one expects us to go. There's the saying, there is no privacy, get over it. And I'm not quite ready to get over it. And I hope that everyone else in this room feels the same way. So with that, if there are any questions, I'm happy to try to address them real quick. Is there time? Or okay, so we've got a couple minutes. So. Any questions? All right. Well, thank you for your time.